Hello and welcome to the third module of PHM 613. For this class, we'll be discussing theories of government intervention. So there are three learning objectives. In the first, we're going to describe theories of public interest and of special interest. Then I'm going to describe different forms of government intervention. And then finally, I'm going to discuss the role of government as a change agent. So, starting with the theories of special interest group and public interest group. All right. So, in the last module, we talked about the perfect market or perfect competition and kind of talked about how the elements of profit maximization and utility maximization and how those are the principles of a perfect competition or perfect market. And the reason we kind of talked about it is because the perfect market is kind of seen as a gold standard when it comes to determining optimal market behavior. It's kind of seen as the way markets should behave in the way that allows competition to thrive. So the assumption is that in a competitive market, in a perfect market, there is effective allocation of resources, and this occurs when the marginal social benefit is equal to the marginal cost, marginal social cost. Excuse me. So, another way of saying this is that one unit of the cost of a product is equal to one unit social value of the said product. More or less like what you're putting in is the same value of what you're getting out. In terms of your what you're paying for the value of something is the value that you are getting out of it. What I mean in this case. So, but we do know, we talked about it in the last module, that the perfect market or perfect competition, it doesn't work in the healthcare industry. It's just not competitive, compatible with that. And so therefore there is a market failure when it happens. And when markets fails, it kind of means that this is not able to allocate resources effectively, and this happens because there is imperfect consumer information. Consumers really are not fully informed of what's going on I mean, there's a degree of knowledge, but for the most part, the knowledge lies with the provider, which kind of gives them monopolistic powers, and they tend to have monopolistic behavior. So that is all the elements that make markets to fail in the healthcare industry. So, in order to mitigate for market failure, government intervention is therefore needed. So, and that's where the special interest theory comes in. So, the special interest theory kind of says that the government needs to intervene in a market, healthcare market, for the um, best interest of the public. And it does that in order to make attempts of restoring efficiency and to be able to distribute income equitably, something that will not be able to to happen in a private market. In a situation, say you leave healthcare to perform as the way that a truly private industry is meant to provide, so that wouldn't happen when it comes to efficiency in and income distribution, that it wouldn't. So that is the reason why government intervention is necessary. And the government intervenes by encouraging competition, by providing information, and reducing harmful externalities. For an example, imposing taxes as a way of changing people's behavior. An example of imposing tax would be some of the taxes that go into tobacco, go into alcohol. I think also goes into sugar for a bit. So those are kind of the taxes in the sense that when there's tax on these things, people who cannot afford to smoke because of the extra costs of smoking as a result of the taxes kind of stay away from smoking. But this is how it is in theory. In actuality, taxes has not been proven to have any effects in changing behavior, particularly with alcohol and with tobacco. But that aside, that is the whole intention of the government in terms of imposing the taxes. And the government also does that, intervenes through redistribution of income in the society. The way that it does that is through the income tax. The income tax is a federal tax, and what the income tax is meant to achieve is that by taxing the very wealthy a lot of money and taxing the not wealthy a smaller amount of money, the government can redistribute wealth by taking the money that comes from the wealthier people, and they're able to provide services that everybody gets to use regardless of their socioeconomic status. So that is a way of redistributing income that happens through government intervention. Now, the special interest theory, on the other hand, uh, kind of tries to get the healthcare market and in the political behavior of the government to kind of act like a private market in the sense of goods and services, whereby it tries to make the type of legislation or the amount of legislation that is passed to be determined by demand and supply. Now, demand and supply in this case is not the demand of the people. Instead, the demand and supply in this case is where the suppliers are the vote maximizing legislators, and the demanders are the wealth maximizing special interest groups. So, what this means is that you have legislators that want to get the most votes that they can get, and then you have the special interest group that want to make the most money they can get. Remember, profit maximization. So you have these two at the other side. The politicians want votes, they want support, they want political contribution rather, while the special interest group, they have the power to be able to pump in money into politicians campaign, and are able to get increase their likelihood of getting re-elected. And in order for them to do that, they need to have some form of um, um, kind of agreement that the type of laws that are going to be passed or even heard are going to be laws that are beneficial to them, or at least not going to be laws that are going to be harmful to them in terms of making the most money that they need to make. So that is how that functions. So these special interest groups, they have professional lobbyists, they're all over DC, and they represent the special interest groups, and they basically try to negotiate for market clearing types of legislation. What I mean by market clearing legislations are kind of legislation that tries to promote a perfectly competitive market, and this happens even in the healthcare industry, for which we know that it's not compatible with it. But these special interest groups will still kind of try to negotiate some of that, or potentially reduce the intervention of the government in that sense. So, the special interest groups, they have the power and they are able to exert some form of political pressure on the politicians, and they do this, having so much money, and also sometimes they have a lot of a network when it comes to, uh, you know, in different places. You have the companies, you have the states, you have the different places where they are all exerting their influence and their power is. Of course, how much influence and power a special interest group has depends on a number of factors, including the size of the group and how effective they are in trying to get things to happen. And in this sense, think of Olivia Pope in Scandal, the series Scandal. If you have watched the series, you will see the manner in which Olivia Pope is always negotiating with different politicians and trying to make things happen in DC. Something very similar to that in terms of how the special interest group kind of function. So, in the real world, however, both special interest group and public interest theories are operating simultaneously. There would always be, at one point or the other, or in some instances, where the government is intervening, to promote efficiency and equity. And on the other hand, you also find places where policies will be enacted for the good of the special interest at the cost of the society. So both things are happening for the most part simultaneously. So there is no government in which it is all one thing or not the other at all. So they kind of are working around the same time. So, what are government interventions? So, these are some of the examples of government intervention. You have provision of goods, public goods. You have the examples providing information. An example of providing information would be the public service announcements, interviews, town hall meetings, all of the thing that happened during COVID, that there was a lot of government intervention that happened during COVID, both in the masking, in the what's it called, in the vaccination and all the COVID education that happened. There was a lot of government intervention that happened in that sense. So that is an example of government intervention. And then you also have some enforcing antitrust law. The first, I think one of the first ones is the Sherman Act, Antitrust Act of 1890. What it tried to do was to prohibit independent physicians from, doing something, trying to prevent them from doing price fixing. And there have been a number of other antitrust acts, both in the US and internationally, but it's really something, this is an example of government intervention. Um, Another example of a government intervention would be sponsoring redistributive programs. An example would be social insurance programs like Medicare and Medicaid, and to some extent, what the Affordable Care Act managed to do to a smaller extent in trying to increase coverage of so many services that were otherwise not covered before Affordable Care Act. So these are all examples of government intervention. So, lastly, discussing government as a social change. So beyond beyond intervening in for the interest of the government, for the interest of public, government do also assume the role of a social a role of social change agents, and it does this in all levels of government, both federal, states, and local. And one of the ways that it does that is in trying to kind of pursue goals that you would expect it to happen in like a typical change agent. For instance, you have the flow of relevant information, and then you have encouragement of the growth of information network. So there is no effort that is made to stop information from flowing, and everything is all around trying to encourage more information ongoing. So if all of this is not making sense to you, I'm going to explain it in a little bit. You can click on theories of information diffusion to kind of understand a little bit. But one of the theories of diffusion is that it comes from a place of concentration, and then you kind of let it flow from being very condensed to a place that is less condensed. I don't know if you guys took chemistry. One of the things that we were taught in chemistry, this is elementary chemistry, is how diffusion happens. It goes from places where something is concentrated and goes out into where it's less concentrated. So that is kind of what the government agencies do. They take information and they're able to push it out. It costs a lot of money to get information out to all the places that it needs to go, and almost very few agency or companies are able to handle the cost of that. So when federal agencies take on that role of diffusing information and doing it both from the federal to the state and from the state to the local, that is a way of pursuing goal as a social change agent. And they do it a lot when it comes to encouraging the adoption of certain policies and administrative processes. Example of that would be what happened with the adoption of ACA. There was a lot of push that happened after ACA was enacted into law. Getting ACA to get adopted by the different states, that took a lot of diffusion of information. That took a lot of social policy entrepreneurship to happen. And remember, ACA was enacted in 2010, and the first states, the earliest states to implement ACA was in 2014, nearly 4 years later. Between 2010 and 2014, there were there were things that were going on that was happening in the federal level, but there was also a lot of diffusion of information and a lot of kind of lobbying within, not really lobbying in the sense of the special interest group, but some kind of negotiation with the government in trying to push for ACA to be adopted, particularly for it to be adopted in states that were at the moment controlled by the Republican Party. Remember, ACA was passed uh, only with the vote of the Democrats, but its implementation, if it has to be statewide, that nationwide, it has to be adopted by both Republican governors and Democrat governors. So there had to be a lot of pushing, a lot of policy entrepreneurship that the federal government had to do in order to get that happen. And some of the things that it did was in the way that ACA was financed in the beginning, where you had the federal government paying 100% of the state's Medicaid costs for certain newly eligible individuals. And this happened up until the end of 2016. The federal government was paying 100% of the state cost of it. So, this, just in case you guys don't know, the state and the government were meant to pay for ACA, but from the start, in order to get ACA to get adopted a lot quicker, the federal government took on 100% the cost of the state, and they did it until 2016, and it was still happening until 2017, and going forward. You can click on the links to kind of tell you more about it, but this is an example of a diffusion of information that kind of happened with the government being a social change agent. But it's not just within the state, with nationally, that the U.S. government operates as a change agent. It does this also internationally. There's a lot of countries, particularly in the global south, that the U.S. government, pumps money into, and it does this in pursuit of social, economic, and administrative change. And you may have heard about the United States Agency for International Development. If you click on this link, it will take you there. A lot of what the USAID does internationally is working as a change agent, as a social change agent, where it tries to provide resources, either financially or information wise, to governments who are not doing so well. Oh, so you can click on this to learn more about that. So this is where we end for today's class. If you have any question, please use the Q&A board to seek clarification. I encourage everybody to ask as many questions as possible, because it is in asking questions that you get to learn more. Do have a lovely day.